The Orphans of Simitra. Chapter 8. 1,000 miles from home. And leave together they did with a smile, this time a beaming smile. The matron broke the news to them. They were going to a distant land that was always green, where everyone was rich, and every child happy. This country had a curious name. It was called Holland. They would travel thousands of miles to get there. A family of peasant folk, like their own, was expecting them, and they would be given every care. Nor were they the only ones to be going so far. A special train would be taking them with other young refugees to this northern country. Will there be cars and services stations there, as there are in Greece? Asked Porphyras anxiously. Holland is a wealthier country than Greece, Porphyras. Wealthier? That meant more garages, more gasoline pumps. Wonderful. It was January now. After several days of cold, grey weather that had placed white caps upon the mountains, old Zeus had renewed his everlasting battle against the clouds. The day they left, the sky regained its exquisite transparency. On the platform, flooded with sunshine, it was as though spring had come. Holding their luggage, Porphyras and Mina waited with Zines, who had been given permission to see them to the train. "You're lucky to be going," murmured Zines. "You're lucky to have someone left so that you can stay," Porphyras answered him. "We'll ride to you," promised Mina. "When we come back, we'll tell you everything we've seen." They said goodbye. The train began to move. Zines went on waving his handkerchief until he could no longer be seen. "Poor Zines," said Porphyras, putting his own handkerchief back in his pocket. "Tonight, in bed, he'll have no one to hold his hand." At once, however, the two of them were suddenly made more light-hearted by the change of scene and the excitement of the unknown. Noses pressed against the windows, they devoured these new aspects of their native Greece. Towns flashed by, all white, and glimpses of the sea, all blue. It was a queer experience to reach the frontier, a little station where people no longer spoke as they did, nor wore the same kind of clothes. The train sped along, rarely stopping. Night came upon the children unawares, as they were traveling beside the wide and tranquil river, very different from the torrents of Epirus or Thessaly. Then they could no longer see the countryside. What fun it was then to be cozily packed in a compartment that was like a warm little house. They laughed and sang for a long time before they fell asleep, curled up in their seats, rocked by the rapid movement of the train. When he awoke, Porphyras rubbed his eyes hard, and rubbed to the door, stepping over the sleeping bodies. It was dawn. "Snow!" he exclaimed. Turning to the others, he shouted at the top of his voice. "It's snow! Snow!" Everyone rushed to the windows. Snow! It covered everything as far as the flat horizon, where there were no mountains. "Snow!" sighed Mina. "Is it cold in the country we're going to?" Then she said, "Oh, look, houses. Is this a big town?" The young refugees had only just got out on the platform when they were surrounded by a crowd of smiling strangers. Hands stretched toward them, offering rolls, buns, cups of coffee, and bags of candy. Everyone smiled at them and spoke to them, using strange words, but ones that were obviously friendly. When the train moved off, Porphyras leaned out of the window to see the name of this big foreign town that was every bit as hospitable as a Greek one. And suddenly he saw enormous scarlet letters on a wooden panel: Belgrade. Of course, he thought. It's the capital of the great country next to ours. He was deeply moved at the thought of the people of a great city hundreds of miles from Greece taking such trouble over orphans. The journey continued, over mountains and across immense plains. It lasted for another 2 days, 2 endless days for Mina. They crossed Hungary, Austria, Germany. The little girl was no longer taking anything and only, from time to time, looking at the snow. She said, "We're terribly far from home." At last, on the third morning, the rumor ran from end to end of the train: this was Holland. The children were asked to collect their luggage, and then they got out of the train to find themselves in a big station. The same travelers who had been so light-hearted as they left Greece no longer wanted to laugh, nor even to talk. Separation was upon them. There, in that station, they shook hands with each other for the last time. Each would go a different way, into the homes of strangers speaking an unknown language. Several children were crying. "How lucky we are," Porphyras said to his sister, "that there are two of us." They went into a vast room. Officials, seated at desk, called out the names of the little refugees from Epirus, that they pronounced very queerly. The child named went up to the desk. Sometimes a man, more often a woman, took the boy or girl away. Like the others, Porphyros and his sister were moving along with the line when suddenly a voice called Porphyros Pedagogos. Marina Pedagogos. They left the line and came forward hesitantly. A very fat woman stood near the desk. She was enormous, her face the color of well-baked Cretan pottery, her hair and even paler gold than maize in Epirus in September. "I'm scared," Micah whispered, clutching her brother's sleeve. But the lady was smiling at them, and a smile has the same power in every country in the world. She said something they did not understand, and, taking Mina by the hand, invited them to follow her. Before they went through the door, the two children looked back at the others for the last time, saying farewell with their eyes. In the new train into which they had climbed, the little orphans remained silent a long time, terribly impressed by the corpulence of the lady. They realized that she wanted to be friendly. She unpacked all sorts of delicacies from a bag she had with her, bent on stuffing the children. Mina found her so entirely different from Greek women she was sure she would never get used to her. All this while the train was traveling across vast and monotonous plains. There was no more snow, but there seemed to be water everywhere. They crossed rivers so wide that in the end they had to leave the train and go on board ship. "Where are we going now?" Mina asked in great distress. "Do you think we really are in Holland?" As a matter of fact, Porphyros was asking himself the same question. Night was falling, bringing no reassurance. The boat sailed along by the darkness for a long time before it came into port. Mina sighed with relief when she found herself on firm land again. The conveyance was drawn up on the quayside, not a car, but a light carriage drawn by an enormous horse with monumental cruppers. A man wearing boots, and enveloped in a transparent raincoat rather like a diving suit, came up to them, took a luggage from the fat woman, with a loud laugh fisted first Porphyros and then Mina into the cart, and set off with them. The horses' hoods clacked like castanets. Porphyros and Mina, in the back, tucked the rug they had been given around their knees. Mina kept her head down because of the drizzle blowing like the fine mist against them. She did not speak. At that moment she was imagining herself back again on the terrace of her home at Simitra, drying plums in the sun. The sun? They had not seen it once since their departure. Porphyros, too, was thinking but not only of his own country. He was in Holland. He was eager to learn what was in store for him. "We crossed by boat," he said to himself. "So we're on an island? Will there be cars on an island?" A precise and pertinent question. So that he could give himself an answer, he thought of his own country, of the islands of the Ionian Sea, of Corfu and Cephalonia. They were not very far from his home, and he had often heard about them. He tried to bring these islands back to mind, or rather to imagine them, knee-deep in cars. The cessation of castanets on the road interrupted his thinking. They had arrived. The man in the diving suit lifted them down from the cart. The door opened, revealing a hall that was snaking wet. "What an extraordinary country," thought Porphyros. "It rains even inside the houses." Before entering, the man took off his boots, the fat lady her shoes, and both put on thick felt slippers. Slippers to walk through the wet in. Porphyros was astonished again. Now the lady was inviting them in their turn to put on the slippers she was holding out to them. And Porphyros suddenly understood that tiles were not wet, but polished, so highly polished that, as he entered, his right foot slid away from his left, and he found himself upon his seat, closely followed by Mina, who had been foolish enough to give him a hand. Laughing, the two children were just getting to their feet again when they became aware of two more unknown faces, also laughing heartily. "Pete. Johanna," said the fat lady, pointing to the boy and the girl. "Pete, Johanna." Porphyros tried to repeat the names. "Pete, Johanna," murmured Mina. When the little Greeks had given their own names, the four children stared at each other, amazed to see how different they were. Pete held out his hand, and Porphyros did the same. Johanna, blushing, went up to Mina and kissed her. The highly polished corridor opened into a big room. Mina felt as though she were entering a palace. Everything, floor, walls, ceiling, and big copper jars was dazzling bright. She was so afraid of falling, or of dirtying something, that she hardly dared take a step. Yet obviously they were going to have a meal here, for the table was set, and a steaming bowl of soup was already waiting. During the meal Mina could not take her eyes from the Dutch children, particularly Johanna, whose thick fair braid reminded her of the ropes used by potters in Eperus to tie up their wares. Her pale blue eyes worried Mina. She could not read their expression. She began to think of little Greek girls, her friends at Simitra, and the ones who were with her at Lycyra. Slowly her eyes filled with tears. To have travelled so far only to be unhappy. Seeing her heavy eyes, the fast lady thought she was half asleep. She indicated that her young charges should come upstairs to bed. The stairs, and the bedrooms too, were polished to a high gloss. It was a miracle that children who nearly all their lives had gone barefoot were able to keep their footing on such a surface. Fortunately, the sheets were not polished. The Dutch woman was understanding enough to have put both their beds in the same room for that first night. "Good night," she said as she left them. That must mean good night. As soon as they were alone, Mina flung herself into her brother's arms, a little lost girl desperately needing help. "Porphyros, I want to go back this very minute. You're tired out, Mina. You'll feel better tomorrow and we'll soon learn to stop slipping all over the floors." The little girl smiled. She snuggled down into her bed, then sighed blissfully. Her feet had come into contact with the cozy warmth of a hot water bottle. "The lady is certainly very kind," she murmured. "Perhaps I'll grow to love her. And you'll be with me always."